All right. So my name is Steve Desrosiers. I'm with Alpha Facility Solutions. I'm their Chief Technical Officer, and I've been doing Builder data analytics since Kurt taught me what Builder was back in 2013. So you can blame him. How many people have seen this document? And how many have read the document? How many maybe have just perused it? And that was kind of me, right? So if you haven't and you want to understand what Builder is all about, this is a really good document. But one day I was looking through the overview and they're talking about the 3 different types of assessment in Builder. And then they had this nice little table in there. And the table said, oh, if here's your objectives, this is the type of assessment you should do, whether, the rating. And I was sitting there looking and it was, yeah, okay, I didn't pay that much attention to it at first, but then I saw this. If you want to compute the remaining service life, direct rating is limited. And I'm like, what? How many of you do a rating other than just direct rating? Nobody, right? That went away in 2014, I think. So it's like, well, what does he mean limited? I kind of got a little nervous because I always want to know why. Now, we all use direct ratings, and direct rating it calculates the remaining service life, and the remaining service life is what tells you whether or not you have a replace work item or not. Okay, so now you're telling me that I may not be replacing things at the right time. So get a little worried. And for those of you who really like BCI also, notice item 5, the prediction curves, it's also limited. And I didn't go look at that because I only had a little bit of time to play. But the direct rating doesn't give you the best curve. So your BCI forecast might not be the best. It might be limited, but we'll see what limited means. So I found myself with some time this Thanksgiving, so I sat down and I'm going to figure out what limited means. So I designed an experiment. And the first thing I did was I broke down what causes an error in remaining service life into the 3 things. Number 1 is, do you know what year something was installed, right? We've all seen that checklist, checkbox estimated. Well, in my experiment, I'm God, so I can say, we'll know exactly when this was installed, right? So we're not checking that box. There's also, the assessor has to choose the right rating. And, if we got 10 people out here and we looked at a rooftop unit, I bet you we could get 2 or 3 different ratings from the inspectors. But for this experiment, I said my assessors are going to be spot on perfect. So I eliminated that error. So that just leaves what kind of error am I going to get just due to the direct rating method. So now remember, in direct rating, you're only allowed one of those 9 points on the curve. So my question is, what happens when you're at an age that's between those 2 points? As an assessor, you have one of 2 choices. If I'm here halfway between green plus and green, do I choose the green plus or do I choose green? Either one, it's not the right CSCI for that object. So there's some error, and that error is going to translate into an error in the remaining service life. For my experiment, I decided to start with a section of 50 years. I should have been more ambitious and done 100 years, but it takes a lot of work. So I actually went into Builder, created a fake building, and I created 153 sections. Now, in the first set of sections, I created a section that was built in 2021, and I gave it an inspection at 2021. And then I created a section that was built in 2020 and inspected it in 2021. All my inspections were 2021, but I created 51 from the current year back 50 years, 3 different sets. And I'll tell you why I did 3 different sets here right now. So I also made some assumption that these particular sections were ideal sections that they're going to degrade exactly according to the design life. So for one set of sections, one set of 51, I didn't give it any rating, so it was age-based. Now, if it's age-based and it's going exactly according to the design life, that makes that set of sections the truth, right? Because that's how Builder is supposed to work. Now, for another set of 51 sections, I'm like, I'm going to have the optimistic assessor. He's going to look at something between green plus and green, and he's a happy guy. He's going to say, we're going to go green plus with this. He's always going to choose green plus. And then we'll have an assessor who's more like me, more pessimistic. And he's going to go in and say, bah humbug, I'm going to give this the green rating. It doesn't deserve to be green plus. It doesn't meet my standard. So, and I did that. So after doing that, I then let Builder do its thing. And then I took all the CIs and the remaining service lives that came out of Builder. And now I started to compare to see what's the impact of doing that. And this is the black line in the middle. That curve is, you know, it looks very familiar to y'all. That's your age-based curve. And so that's the truth, right? Because that's exactly how we said this fictitious system was going to degrade. Now the red line, the top line is I'm the happy guy. That's my optimist line. So you can see that the optimist has one CI and then it drops, and then it has another CI and it drops. And that's the way Builder works. Now, one of the cool things, I'll tell you cool things in a second. The blue line is my pessimistic guy. You know, he's me, bah humbug. This is the ratings you're going to get for all of those 51 sections if I'm the pessimist. Now, one of the cool things that I remember Kurt telling me back in 2013 is Builder doesn't always believe you, right? And I never believed him until now. So actually, I always believe Kurt. He's never done me wrong. But up here, you can see how the red line doesn't stay at 100, right? Even though I'm telling it green plus, it's like, yeah, I don't think so. I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit, and Builder dropped that line, and then it dropped it again. So that was a really cool thing to see. But that's the two different sets of curves you get from the three, actually, the optimist, the ideal, and the pessimist. Okay, so that's the CIs. What does that do to my remaining service life? This was really cool. It's a really pretty diagram. You know, looks like a kite with a bunch of tails. You can see that the top guy, my optimist, is going to get more service life until he gets to the next section, and then he's going to get more service life. So the optimist is giving more service life to the object, and the pessimist is taking it away because that's his job. He's a pessimist, right? So while at the beginning, the optimist is saying, you've got 50 years of remaining service life all the way out to like year 15. And the pessimist is saying, no, you only got 33 years out to year 15. Check his mic.
I was just saying that my read of that is that an optimist view, if I am doing a direct rating of something with a 50-year design life and it's 15 years old, then Builder will assume that that part is now a 65-year part and not a 50-year part because of that slight optimist early direct rating.
Yeah, kind of cool. How many had an inkling that would happen, right? You know, I've always looked at, especially the distance between green plus and green, it's such a wide range that I was always suspect about direct ratings in the early part of life. And Kurt, what do you teach people now?
Age-based and green, unless you can see that it's not green.
this backs that philosophy. It's, it's perfect. Now, what Kurt did was what I did on the next slide, is I plotted the error of the optimist versus the pessimist. And it's also a pretty cool looking graph. So it starts out that they both are right on. That first year, they both know it's 100. And then that next year, the pessimist goes, nah. He ends up with a 30% error in the remaining service life calculation. The pessimist starts out with 0, right? So the optimist is much more accurate at the start of this than the pessimist. But then when you get halfway between the 2 points, guess what? Your pessimist becomes more accurate than the optimist. Now, the other thing that this graph doesn't show is the blue line should really be under the line, but it didn't look as pretty. So I like the crisscrossing because the pessimist is saying less years and the optimist is saying more years, but I wanted to do it as a percentage so you can see. So what that kind of comes down to, if you're doing a direct rating, so the first piece of guidance, which I'm telling you something that 90% of you already know, that if you're doing a direct rating between 2 points and you really think you're on the life cycle curve, if you want to minimize your remaining service life error, choose the direct rating closest in expected years. So I've got those red vertical lines on the plot. So if I'm before, like this was a 20-year life cycle piece, not the 50-year. So on a 20-year life cycle, at 3.5 years, I should choose green plus. After 3.5 years, I should choose green. Now, if you follow Kurt's advice, and I suggest that you do, you don't rate it at all at this point in time unless you have evidence that it's really bad or really good. But when you get out into the ambers and the reds, this is a rule of thumb that you can use when your assessors are out in the field. If you really think you're between 2 points and you kind of had a toss up on which one to choose the one that's closest in age, expected age, and that will minimize your remaining service life error. So then I invented something called the good inspector. I didn't know what else to call it. With a pessimist optimist or an optimistic pessimist. So this guy follows that advice, and now this shows you the error if by following that advice that I'm sure most of you had already figured out. This is the amount of error in the remaining service life as a percent of design life over the 50 years.
So if you're forced to add an inspection and you follow the exact optimal statistical number every time, after roughly 8 years of a 50-year part, you're still 16% of error.
Yeah.
Even if you pick the exact perfect direct rating.
Yes, you pick the most appropriate direct rating, you've got a 16% error in your remaining service life calculation, due to the fact that we have direct ratings. I like that. Thank you. The realist. So this is, I'm sure we all have these assessors on our team, and these are the guys that are going out. And so all your data is based on these guys, right? So percentages and stuff kind of bother me sometimes. So I thought I'd show the same plot, but now I'm going to show it to you in years, how many years of error there is for a 50-year piece. So at 20% through my design life, I've got if I'm going to have an 8-year error in my remaining service life, 20 years, 20% in, which is 10 years for a 50-year life cycle. Yeah. Well, over here, so I'm glad. So as this goes up, I'm at green plus, and as it comes down, I switch to green. Now, that graph is kind of a little misleading too, because what happens is just the year before 20%. So let's say that's in year 9, my remaining service life is 7 years longer than expected. And then the next year, it is now 7 years shorter than expected. So it's a 14-year flop on when that piece of equipment is going to need to be replaced. It's no, if you didn't expect it, it would be right on the life cycle curve. So it would match the life cycle curve.
So there's a question online about would this change if you had multiple inspections in a zone that kind of overrides the builder trust factor? Or would you still have to have an error because of your limits on CI?
I haven't run that. I encourage people because I only did one scenario on one day over Thanksgiving. So I didn't have as much time as I really would like to really play with this. Builder's really fun to look at. There's a lot of interesting things about Builder that we take for granted, but we don't truly understand. And so I'm trying to slowly understand more and more about Builder. And one of the things that they brought up online with that question is, what's the impact of multiple ratings? Now, the Builder documentation says they get more and more accurate the more ratings you have. But the client that I have that has the most ratings, we're finishing up the 3rd rating, which is not a lot. So in 10 years from now, when we come back to this, I might have 6 or 7 ratings for some sections. And then that will be really interesting to see how the ratings have worked for, 7 ratings over the life of an object. But I haven't done that, but it's a great question. So but now, does this fit your scenario? So if I'm in Builder and I'm going to run a scenario, does this big error get into my scenario? Well, at a 50-year design cycle, so at year 10, I've got an 8-year error. Let's say, so I'm going to, my 50 years is now 42 years. That's 32 years in the future. Even if I don't do another rating for 5 years and I can only go 9 years in Builder, that's 14 years. On a 50-year life cycle, this error is not going to see a scenario. Okay. Now, I did the same plot, but now with the 20-year thing, and really the only thing that changes is the y-axis. Now at 20 years, I've got a 3-year error. So if I have a 3-year error in year, so that's 20%, that's year 4. So now I'm in year 4 and I'm expected to expire in year 17. That's 13 years out. If I don't do another inspection and go 4 years, I might end up at the end of a scenario because 4 and 9 is 13. That's really close. So the lower your design life, you start to get small chances that this early error will show up in your scenarios. Okay, so what I observed from this is that the RSL calculation is limited in the first 25% design of life. That's up to 16% error in the design life. The good news is Builder only forecasts for current plus 9. So design life sections in this state of maximum error are probably not going to show up in your scenarios, right? Now, it's pretty good. I mean, it's a maximum of 6% error after the first 25% of life. So that's not a really bad error, because how many of us can actually describe what the end of life is for a carpet? And what's the error in that, right? So I still think the direct rating is great and it's the way to go. But I just think you need to be aware that early on that there's an error, a big error in it, and then as you go, it's not perfect. But no software is perfect. but it's still pretty good, and it's pretty great that, you know, the especially that's just one error source. Sorry, my New England accent came out. You should have heard me before I lived in Texas for 40 years. No, I would have had to put an English to translation dictionary out there. So we don't know how much error is introduced in the remaining service life by estimating the when it was installed. I haven't done that study. And your inter-rater reliability, and that's a term. I've also got an instructional design background. How many of you took the SATs? Did any of you had to take the written part of it? Well, a big thing of the people who get to judge the written part, they have to go through something that's called inter-rater reliability, so that no matter who is judging the test, they get the same answer. In this world, we kind of call it, God, I just lost the word, where we all get together and go through a building. Calibration, yeah. So in this world, it's calibration. So how well are your assessors calibrated? And what's the impact on the remaining service life due to error in your assessors? And if you go back to this diagram back here, the difference between an assessor who rates it here at who's a pessimist at 10 years on this, and the optimist, which is going to cause 16% high and 16% low, you're getting a 32% error due to inter-rater reliability. So I think you got more error in what the assessor picks out than the direct rating error itself. So, forward. Okay, now the person online read my mind. This only had one inspection per section. I would love to repeat this experiment, doing a rating every year. I think it was back into 70 something that I put sections in, and give it the appropriate rating every year and see how builder changes the curve and what this really comes out to be. Maybe next Thanksgiving if I have nothing to do. But as far as advice from this, you know, the first advice is kind of it was kind of obvious without really proving that it's obvious, going to whichever rating is closest in age. But the advice that I give all my clients is when you're putting a 5-year plan together, you need to go out and look at your scenario for the 8 or 9 years. And that's the list where you start. Okay. And then we want them to go lay eyes on those things to say, is the builder forecast accurate? Do I really believe that this is going to be in this time frame? And that's why we go out 8 years, because we know it could be error that was optimistic in its rating, so it's put out further than it should be. And there are things that are pessimistics that show up in that thing that really aren't going to expire that soon, and they need to be pushed out. And then the other reason we like to tell our clients to go out and look at these things is what no software I've seen does yet. We know about correlations between different types of sections. So we know in some cases, if you're doing the light fixtures, you're going to damage the ceiling finishes. Doesn't matter if the ceiling finishes are green plus or red minus, you're going to damage them in some places, and in other places, you're not going to damage them at all. So what else, while you're there working on that part of the building, might you want to touch? So if you're above the ceiling, you may want to do all the work you can above the ceiling at one time, and no piece of software can really tell you that. That's where the human intelligence comes in, and that's why we have all these engineers who maintain these buildings. That's their job to kind of put that together. But the great thing about Builder, it does a pretty good job of telling us what we should look at when we're putting those plans together. So that is all I have. Any questions?
Again, if you do an assessment or don't do an assessment, the life expectancy equipment which will be what was adequate to put the money in maintaining the piece of equipment, and that person just doing an inspection.
Oh, that's another. So the question really is, do you spend money maintaining or inspecting, right? We all think we know what preventive maintenance does to the life of our sections, right? Nobody really knows. I have not seen any data in the industry that says if you do this level of PMs, the life expectancy of your equipment's going to increase by this much. If somebody has that data, I'd love to see it, but I have yet to come across it. So it's always good to do PM. The more, I think it's until proven otherwise, the more PM you do, the more likely the piece of equipment's going to last longer. But there are environmental factors that hit you, right? If you're on the southern coast of Florida and you've got that salt air, your outside units, you're going to be lucky to get 12 years out of them.
Yeah, and that go back to my second question that when builders tell you that the life expectancy is not I think you end up replacing that for team because your battery should not have go time. So like maintenance, we like the unit or someone is not doing something right because that becomes.
So the question is if you've got a 15-year expected life and you run out of life at 13 years and you have to replace it, what's the root cause of that? Well, I don't think builder's wrong because I have looked and I've shown it in the last time we were here in person. We had a plot up that showed the distribution of a 15-year life system for one of our clients, and that they don't all go to the mean of 15 years, right? They spread out. Finding the root cause is really what facility managers want to know. Was it environmental? Was it PM? Was it a machine? Was it a manufacturer issue? Was it you got something that was built on a Friday, right? We all know in the old days, right? You didn't want a car built on Friday because they weren't as good because people had just come back from happy hour. So we don't know the root cause, and builder doesn't have enough information to really determine the root cause. Now, if you take builder and you have a CMMS and you're tracking these things for 10 or 15 years, and I'll be waving to you from the beach when you guys figure this out, because I'll be retired. You can start putting these correlations together, right? The NNSA is doing a great job of that right now. They're looking at, by tying their CMMS, they can look at the work order history of the equipment and what the life is coming out of builder, and they can do some correlations. Now, it's going to take them a while to do that, but they can do that. And the other thing that's going on in the industry is more and more, especially in the HVAC world, more and more people are instrumenting their chillers and their coolers, the big dollar things. We're instrumenting them, and we're sending data through, the IoT, Internet of Things. And now we're analyzing data that's coming through electronically. And so it's like a continuous assessment. And so for things like chillers, we may not be going out laying eyes on them anymore. We're going to be integrating with a building automation system to tell builder the condition. But I don't know of how you're going to instrument this rug or these ceilings, right? So I think the need for an assessor to be eyes on things is going to exist for a while.
Have you seen any instrumentation assessment feedback happening anywhere with your client?
Yes. It's early stages, but there is work out there in the industry. We're doing work. My company is doing work, tying instruments to getting live data feeds and then analyzing the data feeds to predict replacement.
That's still part of just an annual review of the. I know you feel confident. When is human intervention engaged?
Is to develop the right business rules to pop up to a dashboard saying, danger, Will Robinson, this chiller is in trouble. Yes. So
your profile, and then you're gonna come up with this.
It's the thing. So we've got to, you know, we're not quite ready for prime time, but we're working it real hard. And so, but it's a control dashboard. I know people, there are, you know, like if you take a school district, and we do a lot of work in schools, you take a school district, they go in now, and the way they know that something's wrong is they get a phone call saying, hey, this elementary school is really hot. What's wrong? Right? And then people have to dive into a bunch of building automation systems to try to figure it out. Right? So it's unplanned maintenance. So the goal is to try to prevent unplanned maintenance on the big stuff. So,
as a quick anecdotal story, when this was added to the agenda and we started talking about it just conceptually, somebody shared that their client has gone in there with a database patch and systematically removed all green direct ratings. They just said, if it's still early in its life, I don't want that error introduced, so we're just going to purge them from the database, delete them, and only use amber and red inspections. So that was their look at the data, because beyond just scenarios, they wanted to start predicting long-term needs, and they didn't like that error that it was introduced. And green minus was overused and not trustworthy.
yeah. And so I think I skipped over the point. So if I noticed more and more people are now taking Builder through the APIs and taking Builder data, whether it's through reports or the APIs, and putting them into other systems and to do other things with the Builder data. And my company has done that. I have done that. It's something to be aware of, just like Kurt said, that when you're doing that stuff, if you're trying to do a forecast more than 9 years, you need to be aware of this error. And so you can be aware of it by accepting it and assuming that half of them are going to be high and half of them are going to be low, or you can put some algorithm in place to manage it.
The assessment took place even though you're not.
You can add a comment in the inventory. So, you know, your scope says if you do an age-based assessment, leave a comment in the inventory. So in theory, whatever script deleted the direct rating, you could put a comment in the inventory that said, well, but I thought it was green plus in 2018, and then delete the inspection.
The example that you experiment that you led and you built was basically for green.
I did it I started out at green plus and went all the way down to end of life.
Oh, okay.
So that's why the curves go all the way down to end of life. And you can see, you know, the big error is between green and green plus, but you can see out here on the right, that's 100% of design life. So you can see just before you hit 100% of design life, for a 20-year design, I've got 3/4 of a year error at max. So the error that you have at the end of life is really small in the direct rating method. But, you know, the peaks are really that early peak is really what jumps out, and you want to be careful about.
Which is at the flat part of the curve.
Yes, right? Because, you know, green goes about 33% of life, I think, is green, and the green amber border is around 50% of life. So that's where all your error is in the front half of your life. And that's why Kurt has the advice of using age-based for the first half of your life, and you avoid putting in errors in your remaining service life, knowing that you are going to see inspections for those things that will help nail it down. But when you start doing those inspections, you're at the low part of this error curve.
And what other comment/question could you ask about systems that are having sensors on them and feedback for sensors? And it's instructive
PM versus sensor based. Then in the maintenance world since the 50s, and it was primarily only seen as being effective in aircraft because they were have to physically rebuild an engine after so many hours because that's what their laws were.
Right.
Okay, at the time, in order to be safe to fly the planes. But then that's migrated across, and so really the problem that we have with PM is not on going and putting in a new filter, not on going in and changing a fluid. The problem that we have with preventive maintenance is when part of that procedure says that you start doing things. You start taking things off to look at bearings. You start taking things apart to check fans. And if you're checking bearings or fans in a pump that's got a service life 40 years, that service life curve is not designed to have 4 or 5 destructive maintenance checks done. So every time you do that destructive maintenance, you're affecting that curve.
Yeah.
So
Is it done right? Is it not? Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even matter if you do it 100% right. It goes even down to the car and your engine. Right now they have sensors that you put on your car that give you alerts about when things are going wrong. That's so you don't take it to a shop and they pull the heads off and pull the lifters out and check your cylinders. It's, because the process of doing that destructive maintenance, that's part of your procedure at that time, is decreasing your service life curve.
That's a good point. Okay. Got one more? I think there's one more coming.
So I was wondering if we could have some feedback with all of us practitioners here about what some practical ways this is an accurate result experiment that we can rely upon. Does this change any of our business practices going forward? For instance, rather than assessing new inventory or a new asset immediately, maybe it's just adequate to just do the inventory capture and then schedule a 5-year, 6-year out assessment of that. I mean, just some other ways we could approach this that would be.
Language, a further assessment is inventory and inspection. So saying on the newer stuff, doing an inventory, validate what it is, take pictures of its nameplate, understand its years, start the life cycle off. Just don't pick a color right away. It's what we train to.
The other thing is that assume we're trying to say everybody that goes to every section, every piece of equipment, has its service life cycle on their notebook.
But they pick a color. No, but if I'm walking up and I say, look at that water heater, and I'm picking green, my comment to the inspector is, don't pick that color. Just update the year and its capacity. Comment in that you looked at it and letting age determine its condition. So don't say within 10 years of its design life, don't do it directly. I'm just saying, don't ever direct rate green. Only direct rate when you see evidence of a maintenance item or replacement.
And we saw this in one of our laboratories, 2014 construction date, and last year's work plan triggered replacing the chillers in that short of time because it was given a mid-range rating of green, a 95 green, and that in itself caused that shortening of the curve that you were observing in your experiment.
Yeah. That's kind of what started me to, at first I saw that word and then thinking about, well, how much does this hurt?
So when you have a work plan kicking out things like that, you really lose a lot of credibility. Your data credibility goes down the tubes till you get to the root of the situation.
So more frequent inspections will mitigate against that. If you don't go 5 years between inspections, a error in green won't show up on a work item. But if you do go 5 or 6 years before your next inspection, some of those lower design life items will start to show up on a list that you probably wouldn't really want it there, potentially. Or from a funding perspective, if you do like, Air Force did a 25-year scenario, they can, hack the system to run that. So those type of errors would absolutely show up on a 25-year run.
But we chose to delete all those direct ratings that were doing that first 2 years of INAs.
It's a good plan. Now that we got numbers to back it up, we know why. It's not just instinct. So anyway, to me, it was a fun little thing, and I thought I'd share what I did with everybody and hope you enjoyed it and give you something to think about. So.
Thank you, Steve.